Hello everyone, and welcome back to 3 AM Archives, where darkness meets tranquility. I know many of you use these videos to sleep, but before you drift off, I'd love to know which corner of the world you're listening from. Feel free to share in the comments. If these tales help ease you into slumber, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, dim your lights, find your most comfortable position, and let's begin. The GPS screen glowed faintly in the fog, its voice cold and mechanical. "Turn left in 100 feet, it said. I squinted through the windshield, leaning forward until my chest nearly touched the wheel. Left? Where? The mist coiled through the bramble trees, spilling down into the cornfields like something alive, swallowing my high beams whole. But it wasn't just fog. It moved like old film playing in reverse, each curl and eddy revealing ghostly impressions of choices I'd already made. Turn right to leave Sarah, turn left to take this delivery job, straight ahead into whatever I was becoming. Recalculating, the GPS chirped. The map flickered, pixelated for a beat before showing my destination only 2 miles ahead, at the end of this dirt road. At least I hoped it was a road. The divorce had taken my marriage, my house, hell, even my dog. The only thing worse than figuring out how to start over out here, in the sticks, was navigating these godforsaken roads for barely minimum wage. Still, this was better than going home to a dingy one-bedroom and staring at the walls. Right? I reached up and ran a hand down my face. The stubble scratched under my palm. "Come on, Eric," I muttered. "You've been through worse. Get it together." The moment I said it, the car jolted, the tires slipping. I yelped, overcorrecting too fast. Gravel spat out from under the wheels before I steadied onto what barely passed for a path. My left leg was vibrating from pressing too hard on the pedal. Another deep breath. Fog pressed against the windshield in waves. I couldn't see fields or trees anymore. Only a world of gauzy white, like something had wiped the slate clean ahead of me and forgotten to draw in the details. "Let's just get this over with," I told the GPS, because apparently I talked to machines now. The next turn came abruptly. Tires skidded slightly as dirt replaced the gravel road entirely, and I cursed under my breath. On my right, a row of corn stalks that went forever, the edges of the stalks whispering in the faint wind. On my left, mounds of mud crusted with frost glistened under the high beams. It felt wrong. It wasn't wrong, I told myself. It was rural. Everything looks abandoned this far out. Still, my gut buzzed with nerves. Then I saw it. Just up ahead, blurred against the glowing screen of the GPS, was something darker than the fog. A shape, an outline. I instinctively hit the brakes, and the car grumbled to a halt. My chest tightened as I leaned forward to peer through the windshield. A figure stood under a knotted, leafless tree, or what was left of a tree anyway. Its black branches twisted upward like pale arms frozen mid-scream. The figure's shape was thin and stooped. They held something that glowed faintly in their hands, a lantern. But the light was wrong. It didn't flicker like flame or pulse like electricity. Instead, it seemed to develop, like a photograph in reverse, areas of darkness blooming into sickly illumination. As I watched, the light cast shadows that moved independently of the figure, stretching across the ground to form shapes I recognized. The silhouette of my ex-wife walking away, the outline of my old house key turning in a lock for the last time, the shape of divorce papers spreading their dark wings. The longer I stared, the more the lantern's glow seemed to pull at my eyes, creating after-images that lingered even when I blinked. Negatives of memories I thought I'd buried. Each pulse of that unnatural light revealed another crack in reality. Places where the fog twisted into doorways that shouldn't exist. Windows that showed rooms from my past, all of them empty now. And in each scene, I could see faint impressions of that same lantern light, as if it had always been there in the background of my life, waiting for me to notice it, feeding on every mistake, every regret, every moment I'd tried to forget. The fog wasn't just fog anymore. It was like steam rising from developing fluid, turning my world into one massive darkroom where time itself was being processed, twisted, reprinted. And that lantern? It felt almost familiar now, like something I'd seen in a dream, or maybe something I was going to become. My fingers fumbled along the door panel, finding the button for the window. It whined as it rolled down just a few inches. Cold air poured into the car, carrying the smell of damp wood. Somewhere, faintly, I thought I heard crows cawing. "Hey!" I called out. My voice cracked against the silence like a whip, far too loud for the gargantuan hush around me. The figure didn't answer, didn't even flinch. I could only make out vague details, the curve of their thin shoulders, the tilt of their head, the way the lantern light shifted slightly in their grip. I tapped the horn once. Finally, they moved, lifting one hand with the slow, deliberate stiffness of someone waking up, or something pulling the strings for them. The hand didn't wave. It didn't beckon. It pointed. My pulse quickened. "Are you serious?" I asked, mostly for myself. "You couldn't wave me down or something, could you?" The figure stayed there, stooped and silent, their hand still outstretched, pointing down a different path than the one I was on. I craned my neck through the open window, trying to follow where they wanted me to go. Then I saw it, the outline of a barn, barely visible through the fog. I let the window roll back up. My finger faltered as it hit the button. They didn't turn away. They didn't lower the pointing hand. They just stood there, waiting. The barn didn't look close. If I didn't squint, I might have thought it was the fog playing tricks on me, smudging distance into something it wasn't. "Deliver the food," I muttered. "That's the job. Follow directions. That's what you do." The GPS had gone quiet again, but the screen hadn't changed. The marker was still there, right at the end of the dirt path the figure pointed toward. This was it. The moment when normal people turned their car around, reported the whole damn order as undeliverable, and went home to sleep off whatever this was. I gripped the wheel tighter, jaw tensing until it practically creaked. Normal wasn't a luxury I had anymore. Normal didn't pay alimony. The car crept forward, and with each turn of the wheels, the ground beneath seemed to pulse, like I was driving across something breathing. The figure by the tree remained motionless, but its shadow stretched impossibly long across the dirt, pointing toward the barn like an arrow made of darkness. I glanced back, and for a split second the figure was everywhere, multiplied in each rear-view mirror, each window, each reflection off the chrome. When I blinked, they vanished, leaving only impressions in the fog like burn marks in old film. The barn emerged from the mist as if it was being carved into existence with each foot I drove closer. Its angled roof twisted subtly, adjusting itself like a predator tracking prey. Streaks of red paint sloughed off the wood in long ribbons that looked too much like flowing blood, too fresh to be rust. Not abandoned, no. This place was awake, waiting. There were no lights inside, but darkness moved behind the windows, shapes forming and unforming, pressing against the glass before sliding away. The whole structure seemed to lean forward as I approached, like a curious animal catching an interesting scent. The car shuddered as I shifted into park, the metal groaning like it was resisting being stopped here. The engine's idle changed pitch, rising and falling in a rhythm that almost sounded like words. My hands found the key, but before I could turn it, the engine died on its own with a sound like a last rattling breath. In the sudden silence, I could hear everything. The tick-tick-tick of cooling metal, the whisper of fog against glass, and underneath it all, a low vibration that made my teeth ache. The barn's presence pressed against the car windows, and I swore I could see my own reflection aging in the rearview mirror, just for a moment, just enough to make me doubt my sanity. The package on the passenger seat had changed, still wrapped in that careful brown paper, but now the string pulsed gently, like a thread of living muscle. As I watched, the whole thing shifted its weight, settling into the seat's contours like something making itself comfortable. It felt heavier now, much heavier than any food delivery had any right to be. I grabbed it, my fingers brushing against the stiff, waxy texture of the wrap. The barn door loomed ahead, barely visible among the mists clearing just enough to show me where to go. There was no driveway, no porch, only wet grass that squelched under my boots while I walked. Faint creaks bled out of the building. It wasn't the normal sound of warped wood. It was rhythmic. I knocked twice before I even let myself think about it. My knuckles struck something almost sticky, and when I pulled my hand back, the skin tingled. No one answered. Hello? My voice bounced off the barn walls and came back to me, warped, like it had traveled longer than it should have. I shifted on my feet, holding the package tighter. Too tight. I've got your delivery. Nothing. I leaned closer, my breath misting in the air as I glanced around for any clue that I wasn't completely insane for staying. The door, oversized and slightly askew in its frame, hung open just enough to make out the blackness inside. No light, no figures, no sounds except the faint creaks. Still in that rhythm, faint and slow. I could feel myself sweating despite the cold air. My gut was churning again, second-guessing and third-guessing my decisions, but what was I supposed to do? Drop the food in the mud? Drive off and get docked the full fee because I didn't complete the call? I came too far for that. All right, I muttered. All right, let's just get this done. My boots sunk slightly into the soggy ground as I stepped closer. The barn seemed to loom higher the closer I got, as if looking down on me. I hitched the package under one arm and used my other hand to push the door open further. It swung inward with an agonizing groan, and there it was again, the smell. Damp, rotten wood, mud, something metallic lurking underneath, bitter and sharp. Hello? Another shout as I crossed the threshold, and my voice came out softer this time. My throat wanted to close up. I had to push the words out. Inside the barn, my eyes adjusted to show me what my mind desperately tried to reject. The figures weren't just wrong. They violated everything I understood about reality. My brain tried to process what I was seeing and just misfired, like an engine flooding. The taller one's head kept twisting, rotating past any natural angle, past what bone and muscle should allow. I heard a snap inside my own neck, sympathetic pain shooting down my spine as I watched. My legs went numb, pins and needles shooting up from my feet as if my body was trying to disconnect itself from what it was seeing. The shorter figure's spine rippled under its skin like snakes were crawling beneath the surface. The sight hit some primitive part of my brain, and suddenly I couldn't remember how to breathe. My lungs seized up. The edges of the world started to fray and curl like burning paper. Get out, get out, get out, get out. The thought wasn't even words anymore, just pure animal panic flooding my system with lightning. I tried to swallow, but my throat clicked uselessly, tongue swollen and clumsy in my mouth. The package slipped from my nerveless fingers, hitting the ground with a wet thud that shouldn't have been possible for paper and string. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it everywhere, in my teeth, behind my eyes, in the crack of my skull where that electric wrongness burrowed deeper. The world strobed at the edges, reality flickering like a bad fluorescent light. Something warm trickled down my lip. My nose was bleeding, I realized distantly, as if my body was physically rejecting what it was seeing. The copper taste in my mouth mixed with the metallic air until I couldn't tell where I ended, and the wrongness began. It came from the shadows near the back of the barn, where the faint light leaking through the door couldn't reach. A new shape separated itself from the darkness. A figure slouched low, the edges of their silhouette uneven, jerky. They didn't move toward me, didn't speak, just stood there, rocking faintly back and forth. My knees locked in place. The package wobbled in my hands. Another shuffle came, this one almost a step, crunching faintly against the hay-strewn floorboards. And just like that, my eyes adjusted enough to make them out a little clearer. It wasn't one figure. It was two. The person, or thing, in front was hunched, its ragged back slightly too sharp at the angles, like the skeleton underneath was wrong. Behind it loomed another, much taller, thin to the point of being skeletal, its head twisting slowly toward me in unnatural increments. My breath felt trapped somewhere beneath my ribs, clawing its way out until it broke free. "I'm leaving this here, okay?" My voice cracked, and the package banged down onto the little table. I don't want any trouble." Neither figure flinched. I took one step back, my boots grinding into loose shavings on the floor. The thin, skeletal figure tilted its head just slightly. 2 steps back. Neither moved, but there was a sound now, soft and splintery, like wood bending under pressure. It wasn't coming from the figures. It was coming from the barn itself. Behind me, I could see the door barely ajar in my periphery. It felt as far away as the horizon. I needed to leave, 3 steps back, nearly reaching the door, and then the lantern light flared. Out of nowhere, the same pale, warm glow from earlier, the kind that had illuminated the figure under the tree, bloomed suddenly inside the barn. Right there between them, both figures stood still, as shadowless as mannequins in an old display window. The one in front, hunched and twisted, slowly raised an arm, pointing at me exactly the same way the lantern holder had done before. The noise of the wood swelling and creaking grew louder. Somewhere in the deepest recess of my mind, I realized it wasn't just sound. The barn, it was pulsing. The fog outside thickened again, coiling closer, creeping along the floor like it had been waiting to rush in. I bolted. I don't remember what sound I made when I stumbled out of the barn like a drunk. Probably something like a wet, strangled yell. My boots thudded against the ground, legs twisting beneath me as I half ran, half staggered toward the car. The door handle groaned as I wrenched it open and slipped in behind the wheel. By the time the engine roared to life, I didn't care if I'd sprayed mud a mile high. I slammed the car into reverse, turned so sharply that the back tires fishtailed, and punched the gas so hard it pinned me against the seat. The figures didn't follow, I think. I didn't look. The road swallowed me whole on the way out. Fog crowded the windows thick as wool, but I didn't care how fast I was driving anymore. The GPS screen flickered, once, twice, before a second voice crackled through its speaker, deeper and distorted, overlapping with the familiar one. "Rerouting to final destination," they said in unsettling harmony. My hands were slick on the steering wheel as I watched the fog move. Not like mist should move, but like something with purpose, with hunger. It twisted across the road ahead, forcing the pavement to bend and writhe under its touch. The headlights caught it just long enough to show me what was happening. The road itself was changing, stretching, reshaping itself with each turn I took. Left, right, left again. Each curve exactly where I didn't expect it, each straightaway shorter than it should have been. The car jostled violently, and through the rattling of my teeth, I swore I could hear laughter buried in the static of the GPS. Then the smell hit. Rotten wood, stagnant water, but worse now, thick and cloying at the back of my throat, like something sweet that had been left to curdle. It took me a moment to notice the package still sitting next to me on the passenger seat, the string now loose and dangling off one side of the brown wrapping. My first instinct was to leave it alone, to let it sit there like a ticking bomb and pretend it wasn't there at all. Maybe I could stop at the first dumpster I passed and pitch it. But the damn thing was staring at me, or that's what it felt like. I heard the slow creak of something shifting inside, a sound like paper sliding against paper. The chemical smell was stronger now, mixed with something else. That musty odor basements get when you uncover old family albums. My head swam with half-formed memories. My dad's darkroom, the divorce lawyer's office, the last photo Sarah took of us together before she left. The tear in the package had spread wider, and what I could see inside didn't make sense. The edges seemed to extend further than the package's dimensions should have allowed, like looking into a deep well. My hands were on the wheel, locked there in a death grip, but I flicked a glance down at it. Something was exposed now where the wrapping had split apart, something black and white. It almost looked like print. I shouldn't have done it. But I reached over anyway, tearing the rest of the paper in one quick motion like I was ripping off a Band-Aid. The package spilled open on the seat, and my eyes went wide. Photographs. They fanned out across the threadbare upholstery, all glossy and stark under the faint greenish glow of the dashboard. Dozens of photos at least, black and white. At first, they didn't make sense. An empty road, an old streetlight leaning too far to one side, the tail end of a delivery car driving away. My car. I grabbed one, fumbling with my free hand while the other white-knuckled the steering wheel. The road on the photo looked eerily familiar. I flipped to another. It was clearer this time. A shot of me sitting in my car, leaning forward, my face tight with worry as the fog closed in up ahead. The photos spread out further as I mashed the brakes, the car skidding on the loose dirt as I spun to a stop. The rest of the contents slid to the passenger side floorboard, a few landing face up. My breathing hitched, my stomach flipped over. They weren't just of me driving. There were photos of me leaving the barn just minutes ago. my face pale and panicked as I bolted for the car. My footprints were left sharp and wet in the mud. I blinked and snatched another one lying closest to me. It was worse. It was this exact car, pulled off into the shoulder of a dirt road. My head bent slightly as I stared down at a stack of photographs. I was living the damn photo. The air inside the car felt heavy, suffocating, like I'd driven into some kind of vacuum. My head snapped up to the windshield. I could barely see the road anymore. The fog pressed closer, impossibly dense, eating up the headlights as fast as they could project outward. And outside? There. Faint at first, but coming closer. A smear of warm, flickering light bobbing through the haze. I didn't wait to see the rest. I slammed the car into reverse, nearly grinding the gear shift into the floor, and jammed my foot onto the gas. Cornstalks blurred past my side mirrors. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. My only plan was to push through every goddamn turn and ditch until I found somewhere brighter, somewhere with the thrum of life and people to escape this insanity. But the light didn't stop. It stayed with me, flickering and swaying, just far enough behind that I couldn't see who or what was carrying it. Something thudded against the rear of the car, light enough to make me think it was an animal at first, or maybe a rock kicked up from the tires. But then the whole world lurched as another thud rattled the chassis. My foot sank harder into the gas pedal. The lantern flickered again, bobbing alongside the car, the fog warping its glow so I couldn't tell how far away it was. When the third thud came, something splattered across the back window, a wet, dark smear that hung in ribbons before drooling down the glass. I fought the urge to look closer. I had to keep driving. I could feel the highway coming again. I had to make it. The final hit made me lose control, not from the impact itself, but from what I thought I saw. A single hand slapping against the glass, followed by the faintest trace of a face carved in fog, grinning. The car spun, tires screaming against the dirt until I hit something that jolted me forward in my seatbelt. The engine sputtered, stuttering to silence. My chest heaved as panic wound tighter around me. The lantern light appeared again, closer this time, directly ahead of me. Through the windshield, the fog finally parted for a moment. It wasn't just a lantern anymore, it was me, or what was left of me. The figure that stood there, quaking and tattered, was something grotesque. A rotting corpse in the same damn clothes I wore, a grotesque mockery wearing my own reflection. It staggered forward, closer to the car, and then raised one skeletal hand slowly until it pointed straight at me. Its mouth didn't move, but the dead pits of its eyes burned through me. "Run!" came the croaked, disjointed whisper. I did. I didn't grab my phone. I didn't grab the photos. I threw the car door open and sprinted into the haze, not knowing if I'd find safety or simply something worse. The only thing I knew for certain, with every shattered nerve in my body, was that I couldn't stop running. By the time I made it to a gas station, I don't even know how far I'd run. The sun was edging the horizon, pushing faint streaks of orange through what was left of the fog. The gas station buzzed faintly in the pre-dawn quiet, its fluorescent lights so bright they felt like physical beams I could lean against. I parked my mud-covered car on the far end of the parking lot, as far from the lights as I could, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I didn't want to be seen. Maybe I just didn't want to look at the car. I cracked the door open and stumbled out, my legs numb and ringing from gripping the pedals too long. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, half bent over, letting the cold air prick the sweat on my neck and arms. It smelled normal again, not corn or damp wood or rot, just nothing. The photos were still inside the car. So was the package, what was left of it. I didn't take anything with me as I staggered into the gas station. The gas station's fluorescent perfection felt wrong after the chaos outside. Too clean, too ordered, like a stage set waiting for actors. The hum of the refrigerators pulsed in time with my headache, a rhythm that reminded me of the barn's breathing. The cashier didn't look up when I entered. His white mustache twitched like moth wings against his lip. Coffee? The word tasted like copper in my mouth. His head moved, just his head, while the rest of him stayed perfectly still. The coffee steam formed shapes that looked almost like faces before dissipating, and each sip spread warmth through my chest that felt wrong, like I was drinking something that had been waiting too long to be consumed. Behind me, the bells over the gas station door jingled. It startled me, and I spun too quickly, spilling the steaming coffee onto my sleeve. I hissed through clenched teeth and swiped at my arm, but there was no one at the door, just the empty parking lot. Just fog. "You all right?" At the counter, the cashier finally raised his head, his eyes narrowing slightly in what might have been worry. When I didn't answer, he tapped the counter with a faint clink. "You all right?" he asked again, sharper this time. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Behind him, above the rows of cigarettes and lotto tickets taped to the wall, was a security monitor, one of the cheap ones that play a grainy black and white live feed of the lot outside. I froze. On the screen, standing just behind my car, was a figure. No lantern this time, just that twisted, familiar shape, closer than it had ever been. As I watched, it took a step toward the gas station door. Everything inside me clenched at once. The coffee slipped from my hands and hit the floor, splattering between the spotless white tiles. I stumbled toward the door without thinking, shoving it open so hard the bells rattled and clanged. My eyes darted across the fog-lined lot. Nothing, no figure, just my car, beaten up, mud-coated, sitting there with the same bent front bumper I'd been meaning to get fixed for weeks. The cashier called something behind me, but I didn't hear him anymore. My eyes were locked on the car. There, smeared down the windshield, was something faint, like the muddy streak of a handprint. It wasn't visible before. I backed away from the car slowly, my legs wobbling under me. I could feel eyes on me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the same sick curiosity that had pulled me into the barn wouldn't let me look away. Something moved along the far edge of the lot. At least I thought it did. The mist rippled, parting faintly under the dim streetlights. And then I saw it. Not in the lot, but in my car's side mirror. That familiar glow, blooming to life like a chemical burn, filling my car from the inside out. The lantern was in my back seat now, held by hands I couldn't see, illuminating my rearview mirror until it looked like a developed photograph of my own terrified face. Faint and flickering at first, but not like any natural light. More like memories developing in reverse, eating away at reality instead of revealing it. The lantern's light appeared in the windshield's reflection first, transforming the glass into a photographic negative of my life. I saw myself as I would be, as I had been, as I might have been in all those other versions of my story. Each pulse of that sick light showed me another path I could have taken, but they all twisted back here, to this moment, to this parking lot, to that light that had been following me my whole life without my knowing it. I don't know if it was waiting for me. I don't know if it ever will. But I understand now what that light really is. It's time itself, corrupted and wrong. Developing moments that should stay hidden. Revealing the horrible truth that every choice I ever made was just another step toward this endless night. And when I drove away an hour later, after stammering some kind of excuse to the cashier, who just shook his head and let me go, it followed me. I swear it did. That photographic glow that turns reality inside out, showing me what's really there beneath the surface of things. The GPS blinked to life when I hit the highway, but the screen showed something impossible. A maze of roads that twisted back on themselves, forming patterns that looked almost like letters, almost like a face. The mechanical voice spoke, but this time it wasn't alone. Layers of sound rippled through the speaker, a chorus of different tones all saying different things. Recalculating. Return to start. Final destination ahead. I yanked the power cord out. The screen stayed on. When I stopped for gas 200 miles later, there was a photo tucked under the dashboard, one I hadn't seen before. It showed me sitting at a gas station, drinking stale coffee, spilling it down my arm, staring at the door just after it opened. I don't know what it was, and I don't know how it keeps finding me, but I do know this. It's not over. It never is. The doorbell chimed before I even finished submitting my order. That's impossible, I thought. staring at the confirmation screen still loading on my phone. I'd literally just pressed order for my late-night pad thai. After 12 hours of hauling boxes, I'd finally given up on my no takeout for the first month budget plan. Not that budgets mattered much anymore. When you're running from a plagiarism scandal, you take whatever position and whatever housing you can get. The house creaked around me, settling into the night with sounds too rhythmic to be random, like breathing, like waiting. The university's offer had come suspiciously quick after my hasty resignation from Princeton. Teaching position available immediately, the email had read, housing assistance included. When they'd shown me this place at half the market rate, I hadn't asked questions about the strange dark stains that crept up the wallpaper like grasping fingers, or why every mirror seemed slightly warped, reflecting angles that didn't quite match the rooms they hung in. I couldn't afford to, not with my old department still demanding a formal investigation into my last paper. They'd never prove I'd used my advisor's unpublished research after his death, but the whispers would follow me unless I put enough distance between myself and Princeton. Boxes towered around me in the dim living room of my new rental, their contents spilling across the hardwood floors that seemed to absorb more light than they reflected. Some weren't even my boxes. I'd found them in the basement, labeled in different hands. Rebecca's winter clothes, Mom's china, the kind of boxes people mean to come back for but never do. Each of mine was labeled in my characteristic chicken scratch. Even after 6 years of grad school, my handwriting remained defiantly illegible, just like my citations, a bitter voice whispered in my head. I hadn't even found the box with my lamps yet, though I'd labeled that one "Lights" with 3 exclamation points. The sun had set an hour ago, leaving only the harsh glow of my phone screen and whatever moonlight filtered through the dusty windows. The glass was oddly warm to the touch, even with the autumn chill outside. Perfect ambiance for grading undergraduate papers, I thought wryly, if I could just find the box marked soul-crushing disappointments. Earlier, while clearing space in the kitchen cabinets, I'd found a letter tucked behind a loose piece of wallpaper. The paper was yellow with age, the ink faded. Dearest Tommy, if you're reading this, I never made it to the airport. I know you told me not to rent this house, that the price was too good to be true. You were right. There's something wrong with the deliveries here. Every night they come with something different. Last night, they offered me a chance to see you one last time. I almost took it. Tonight will be harder to refuse. All my love, Mom. I'd also found a diary wedged behind a radiator, its last entry simply reading, "The delivery man knows what happened to David. Says he can prove I didn't do it. Just have to sign." The doorbell rang again. 3 quick chimes, like someone jabbing the button impatiently. The sound seemed to reverberate through the house's bones, making the floorboards shiver beneath my feet. I picked my way through the maze of boxes, using my phone's flashlight. A sweet, cloying smell wafted from the heating vents, like overripe fruit left too long in summer heat, or flowers just beginning to rot. The porch light flickered to life as I approached the door. Strange, since I hadn't found the switch for it yet. The ancient wiring hummed with a sound almost like distant voices, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. A man stood on my porch in what looked like a vintage delivery uniform, crisp white shirt, pressed black pants, and a small cap perched at an angle. The logo on his shirt was faded beyond recognition. He held a brown paper bag that smelled nothing like the Thai food I'd ordered. "Evening delivery for number 47 Cedar Street," he said, his smile too wide for comfort. "Just like always." I gripped the door frame. There must be some mistake. I just placed my order 2 minutes ago, and it wasn't... "Oh, I know exactly what you ordered, Jordan." His eyes gleamed in the flickering porch light. "I've been delivering to this house for a very long time. Mrs. Henderson always ordered chicken soup on Sundays, said it reminded her of the kind her son Tommy used to make before the accident. The Wilsons were pizza people, every Friday night for 6 years, until Mr. Wilson found that winning lottery ticket in his delivery. And poor Rebecca Martinez." He trailed off, shaking his head. "She had such a taste for Chinese food. Ordered it the night before her trial. The evidence against her would have vanished if she just signed. How do you know my name? I hadn't entered this address for delivery anywhere except the app on my phone moments ago. The delivery man reached into his satchel and pulled out a leather-bound album. I keep track of all my deliveries. Would you like to see? Against every instinct screaming at me to shut the door, I found myself reaching for the album. The academic in me couldn't resist. 6 years of studying historical artifacts had trained me to grab primary sources first, ask questions later. The leather felt cold and slightly damp under my fingers, reminding me of that summer internship at the moldy university archives where I'd first fallen in love with preservation work. He flipped it open, and my breath caught. The first photo showed this same house, but newer, dated 1962. A woman accepted a package from a delivery man, the same delivery man standing before me now, unchanged. The next photo, 1975, same driver, 1989, 1997, 2010. Different residents, different seasons, but always the same delivery man with that same unsettling smile. You'll want to accept your delivery, Jordan. He thrust the brown paper bag toward me. Everyone does eventually. It's part of moving in. The smell from the bag hit me. Not pad thai, but something ancient and sweet, like decaying flowers. The porch light sputtered, casting strange shadows across the delivery man's face. For a moment, his features seemed to shift, revealing something hollow beneath that practiced smile. I don't want it, I said, stepping back. My voice came out steady, the same tone I used to shut down aggressive questions at conferences. Cancel the order. 5 years of teaching had taught me something about authority, even if my hands were shaking. He moved forward, crossing the threshold without invitation. The house seemed to exhale around us, its ancient timber groaning in welcome. That's not how this works. Ask yourself why the rent was so affordable, Jordan. Why this beautiful house has changed hands so many times. His uniform began to darken, as if water was seeping through the fabric. The wallpaper rippled like muscle beneath skin. Every house needs to be fed. I almost laughed. Affordable rent? I jumped at it like a drowning man at a life preserver. Just like I jumped at the university's offer, at their willingness to overlook the misunderstanding at Princeton. When you're running from your past, you don't check the teeth of gift horses. But maybe I should have noticed how the house's shadows always fell wrong, how they stretched toward me like hungry things, how even in daylight the corners remained impossibly dark. Maybe I should have wondered why every room felt larger when you were alone in it, as if the walls expanded to swallow you whole. I stumbled backward into a stack of boxes, sending them toppling. A dusty shoebox spilled open, scattering what looked like research papers across the floor. The previous tenant must have left them behind. A child's drawing fluttered out, a crayon house with a dark figure standing on the porch. On the back, in a child's unsteady hand, the delivery man says he can bring Daddy home. A yellowed newspaper clipping caught my eye. Local woman vanishes after moving day, 1962. Mrs. Henderson, the chicken soup lady he'd mentioned. My gaze jumped to another article, a photograph of a missing person poster stapled to a telephone pole on Cedar Street. Rebecca Martinez's face smiled out from the grainy photo, the same face I'd seen in his album, the same expression as she accepted her final delivery. Beneath the articles, I found a water-stained letter in shaking handwriting. To whoever finds this, don't be fooled by what they offer you. My David is dead. No delivery can bring him back. The man with the bag shows up every night with a new version of the truth, each one more tempting than the last. But the price, God help me, I can hear something moving inside the walls now. If you're reading this, run. The rent is cheap because the letter ended there, the rest torn away. Get out, I said, but my voice shook. The brown paper bag in his hands had begun to pulse, like something inside was trying to break free. I can't leave until the delivery is complete. Those are the rules. His smile stretched impossibly wide now. I've been making deliveries since this house was built. Every new resident, every single night until someone survives. That's the deal I made. Or rather, the deal that was made for me. The porch light exploded in a shower of sparks. In the sudden darkness, I could see that the drive, R, was no longer entirely solid. His edges blurred like smoke, but that damned uniform remained crisp and pristine. The others didn't know they had a choice, he continued, holding out the writhing bag. But you do, Jordan. Take the delivery or don't, but choose quickly. Some choices only come once. I looked at the album lying open on the floor, at all those smiling faces accepting their final deliveries, at the driver, unchanged through decades of death. My phone lit up with a notification. Your driver is still 15 minutes away. In that moment, I understood what I had to do, but understanding and action are different beasts entirely. I refused the delivery, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The driver's smile widened until it split his face. Louder, Jordan. Make it count. The bag in his hands convulsed, the paper tearing away. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, I saw what was inside. Not a journal at all, but something that only looked like one from the outside. The leather cover rippled with a pattern of raised veins, pulsing in time with my own heartbeat. The pages were thin membranes that flickered with moving images. My advisor in his final moments, discovering something in this very house that made him claw marks into his own desk. But the worst part was the sound, a wet, shuffling whisper, like dozens of tongues trying to form words with borrowed mouths. Then it shifted, becoming what I wanted most to see. His journal, his research, my redemption. But I couldn't unsee what lay beneath the illusion, couldn't unhear that terrible whispering. Every resident gets what they need most, the driver said softly, and I noticed for the first time how his tongue moved strangely in his mouth, as if it didn't quite fit. Mrs. Henderson wanted her dead son back. The Wilsons wanted their lost fortune. Rebecca Martinez wanted her youth. You want your reputation, your future. Just sign for the delivery. The pages called to me. One signature, and I could go back to Princeton vindicated. My hands shook as I reached for the journal, but then I saw the signatures in his ledger. Really saw them. Each signature was written in the same shaking hand, the same desperate hope, different names, different years, but the same trembling acceptance. And in the corner of each page, barely visible, a house number, 47 Cedar Street, written over and over, claiming ownership of each soul that signed. The house, I whispered, understanding finally. It's not about the deliveries. It's about the signatures. Every time someone signs, they're not accepting a delivery. They're signing over their right to leave. The driver's smile stretched wider. Smart boy. Too smart for your own good, just like your advisor was. He lived here too, you know, before his accident. The journal in the bag changed, my advisor's handwriting morphing into his final words. Equations about dimensional spaces, about buildings that were bigger on the inside than the outside, about doors that led to impossible places, about hunger that could never be satisfied. I looked at my own shaking hands, at the pen the driver now offered, the same pen that had signed all those other names. Its nib was dark with old stains that looked black in the dim light but smelled of copper. I could save my career, save my reputation. All it would cost was my right to walk away. The thing in the bag squirmed, and for a moment its illusion slipped again. Through the torn paper, I glimpsed something that might have once been fingers pressed against the membrane, leaving impressions from the inside. They formed shapes that looked almost like words, like all the signatures that had come before, written from the wrong side of reality. I refuse, I said, my voice strengthening. And I know how to make it stick. I grabbed the ledger before he could stop me and signed my name, not on the delivery line, but across the house's address, striking it out with an X. The driver screamed as the book began to burn, decades of contracts going up in flames. You cannot refuse what owns you, he shrieked, but I was already writing, canceling out the house's claim with every stroke. The walls shuddered, the floor cracked. 60 years of signatures burned away as the house's hold was severed, one name at a time. I'd spent my career taking the easy way out, accepting things I shouldn't. Not this time. The tendrils around my wrists burned like fire now, searing into my flesh. But I kept writing, each signature undone with my own. The driver's form flickered like bad reception, his edges blurring. 60 years, he whispered, his voice like wind through dead leaves. 60 years of deliveries, and you choose to burn rather than bend. Unlike your last choice, Professor. Unlike all the others. Even your advisor signed in the end. The house screamed. There's no other word for it. The windows shattered inward, and every box in the room burst into flames. The walls pulsed with a wet, organic movement, and that sickly sweet smell from the vents became overwhelming. The smell of 60 years of trapped souls rotting behind the walls. I felt the tendril burns cutting deeper, marking me permanently. The floorboards buckled and writhed, trying to trap my feet, to pull me down into the hungry dark beneath the foundation. But I held the ledger tight, writing through the pain until the final signature was struck through. The house's death throes shook plaster from the ceiling. Support beams snapped like breaking bones. The driver's uniform collapsed, empty now except for decades of dust. The leather album followed, its pages already ash, and as the house's hold weakened, I could hear them, whispers of gratitude from behind the walls, 60 years of trapped voices finally fading into silence. My phone lit up with a notification. Your driver is still 15 minutes away. I spent that first night in the ER, getting the strange rope-like burns on my wrists treated. The doctors asked questions I couldn't answer. The house's history had burned away with everything else. The papers, the photos, the evidence all gone. My chance at redemption turned to ash with it. Just like my security deposit, after firefighters broke down the door to deal with the electrical fire that had started in my living room. But I survived. And now, every time I order delivery, I trace the scars on my wrists and remember, some prices are worth paying to remain uneaten, even if it means living with our choices. The house at 47 Cedar Street remains empty. I drive past it sometimes, on my way to campus, where I teach intro classes under my own name. It's not Princeton, but it's honest work. I never look directly at the porch.
I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of my apartment window, watching the last light fade from the city grid. Block by block, darkness swallowed the streets below, until only the dim glow of a few emergency generators remained. 14 floors up, I felt suddenly untethered, floating in a void of black glass and concrete. As the temperature dropped, strange patterns bloomed in the frost on my window's spiraling shapes that reminded me of pregnancy symbols I'd seen in some ancient cave art documentary, but somehow wrong, inverted, hungry. My hand drifted to my swollen belly. Just us now, little one. The baby kicked in response, a Morse code of movement that had become our private language during these long weeks of bed rest. I reached for the pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream on my nightstand, liberally sprinkling it with salt before taking another bite. My doctor had been concerned about my salt intake lately, but nothing else satisfied the craving. Not the salt-rimmed glasses of chocolate milk, not the pickle spears practically crystallized with the stuff. My phone chirped. "Your delivery driver, Thomas, is approaching." Perfect timing. My salt cravings had become unbearable lately. I'd ordered enough to last through the week, though the delivery app had flagged my order. "Are you sure you want 6 boxes?" I was. The empty boxes in my recycling bin proved how sure I was. The building's emergency lights cast sickly shadows in the hallway, visible through my peephole as they flickered and buzzed. A notification lit up my phone. From building management, power restoration estimated 6-8 hours. Please remain in your units. Then another message popped up. This one from Mrs. Thompson in 1408. Warning. Strange delivery man entering empty apartments. Called police but phone's down. Stay safe. My throat tightened. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and deliberate. The emergency lights stuttered, and in that strobe-like effect, I saw a figure approaching my door. The uniform looked wrong somehow. Too dark, the logo distorted. The knock came. 3 sharp raps. "Delivery for 1407, a voice called out. I stayed perfectly still, one hand protectively covering my belly. Just leave it at the door, please, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, but I have special delivery instructions that require a signature. The handle of my door rattled. I need to verify your identity. I shuffled to my peephole, my pregnant belly making it awkward to bend and look through. The fisheye view distorted everything, but I could make out a tall figure in what seemed like a delivery uniform. Something dark dripped from the package he held, and a sickly sweet odor seeped through the gap beneath my door, like meat left too long in summer heat. The smell made my stomach lurch. A soft, wet sound drew my attention downward. Was that movement? Through the narrow space under the door, I caught glimpses of something dark and sinuous, like oil spreading across my welcome mat, or perhaps something moving. Ma'am, I can hear you at the door. I really must insist. He tapped the package against my doorframe. Tap, tap, tap. Each impact left a viscous stain that seemed to pulse in the emergency lighting. Your special delivery can't wait. Behind his words, I heard another sound, a rhythmic clicking, like too many teeth chattering in anticipation. My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Don't let him in. He was at 1201. No one lives in 1201. I'm calling building security, I said, my voice shaking. The baby kicked hard as if sensing my fear. He chuckled, a wet sound that made my skin crawl. The phones are down, Jessica. The elevators too. It's just us now. His voice changed, becoming deeper, resonant. You and your precious cargo. I backed away from the door, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The doorknob began to turn slowly, metal scraping against metal. I hadn't left it unlocked. I knew I hadn't. My back hit the kitchen counter, and I heard something fall. The box of Morton's salt I'd been binging on earlier clattered to the floor, spilling white crystals everywhere. The doorknob stopped turning. You can't keep me out forever, he growled. The Dark Mother requires her tribute. All the unborn children of this cursed tower will be her feast tonight. But he didn't move forward. Through the gap under my door, I could see his shadow shifting, agitated. The salt. He couldn't cross the salt. My hands trembled as I grabbed more salt containers from my cabinet. I'd ordered 6 boxes in total, my pregnancy cravings working in my favor. With shaking fingers, I poured thick lines across every entrance. Windows, vents, even the small space under my refrigerator. Clever girl, he hissed through the door. But there are others who aren't so fortunate. Can you hear them? As if on cue, a scream echoed through the building, distant but clear. The baby kicked violently, and I pressed my hand against my stomach. Shh, little one, we're safe. Through the peephole, I watched him turn his head at an impossible angle, completely backwards, then further, spinning slowly like a screw being twisted too far. His uniform wasn't just rippling now, it writhed and bulged, as if dozens of serpentine shapes were coiling and uncoiling beneath the fabric. What I'd thought was a logo on his chest blinked at me. The package in his hands morphed, membrane-like flesh parting to reveal something that gleamed wetly in the emergency lights, pulsing with its own internal rhythm. When he spoke again, it wasn't one voice but many, a chorus of wet whispers and guttural growls layered over each other. The Dark Mother's hour approaches. The voices split apart, some high and keening, others deep enough to make my teeth vibrate. When the last light fails, each word caused his uniform to ripple more violently, shapes pressing against the fabric as if trying to tear free. The emergency lights flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, I heard scratching at my windows, 14 stories up. My phone's dim screen showed 9% battery remaining, but I had to try. I dialed 911 again, and this time, through the static, I heard a voice. All units en route to Cedar Heights, multiple reports. The scratching grew louder. I dumped the last box of salt along my bedroom windowsill, watching pale faces press against the glass before retreating from the barrier. In the fog of their breath, symbols began to appear, curved shapes that hurt my eyes to look at, ancient writing that seemed to writhe and shift. Through the vents came a sound that might have been singing, might have been screaming, voices chanting in a language that made my teeth ache and my baby twist restlessly. The driver's laughter echoed through the hallway, harmonizing with the otherworldly chorus, mixing with more distant screams. My phone light died just as the emergency lights gave one final buzz. In the perfect darkness, I sat in my salt circle, rubbing my belly, whispering comfort to my baby, and listening to the sounds of something ancient and hungry trying to find a way in. When dawn finally broke, they found me still sitting there, surrounded by salt. The other apartments, the ones without salt, without protection, stood empty, their doors hanging open. They never found the bodies of the other pregnant women, or the dark uniformed driver. Now I keep my salt boxes full, and I never ever accept deliveries after dark. My daughter is 3 now, healthy and perfect in almost every way. But sometimes, when she thinks I'm not listening, her babbling takes on a rhythm that makes my skin crawl. And every night, I find her windowsill covered in salt, not scattered there by my hands, but carefully arranged in those same ancient patterns I once saw in the frost. The wind shrieked against my cabin windows like a trapped banshee while I hunched over my laptop, desperately trying to meet my publisher's deadline. The cursor blinked mockingly at the end of Chapter 7, where it had stayed for the past 3 hours. My grocery delivery app chimed, drawing my attention to the tiny Wi-Fi symbol in the corner. My only connection to the outside world up here in the Colorado mountains. My phone lay dead on the desk, victim to the non-existent cell service, but at least the Wi-Fi still worked. For now. The app showed my driver was 20 minutes away. I'd ordered before the storm warnings, and now guilt gnawed at my stomach. No one should be out in this weather. The power flickered, and I frantically hit save. 3 years of writer's block, and now this storm threatened to derail my comeback. Thunder cracked overhead. No, not thunder. In winter? The sound came again, and I realized it was the ancient pine next to my cabin, its branches groaning under the weight of the snow. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. My desk chair rolled back, bumping against my filing cabinet. Coming! I grabbed my wool cardigan, wrapping it tight around my shoulders. The knock came again, more insistent. Through the front window, I could see the delivery car, already dusted with fresh snow. The road behind it had vanished under white drifts. I opened the door to find a man holding 2 large paper bags of groceries. Snow dusted his dark hair, and something about his steady gaze made me hesitate. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks, but his eyes seemed too focused, too knowing. He stood exactly 17 inches from my threshold, the same distance I'd always kept my desk from my bedroom door as a child, though I wouldn't remember why until much later that night. Evening, Miss Parker. His voice was perfectly pleasant, professionally courteous. I'm James. Mind if I bring these in? Storm's getting worse. I backed away, letting him enter. What choice did I have? The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees since I'd last checked. Still, something felt off. How had he known my name? I must have entered it in the app, I reasoned, though I couldn't remember doing so. James walked straight to my kitchen, moving with the confidence of someone who'd been here before. I told myself it was just the standard open concept layout, living room flowing into kitchen, like every other cabin up here. But his movements weren't quite right. Too smooth. Like he was gliding rather than walking. When he turned to navigate around my kitchen island, his head rotated first, body following a fraction of a second too late, like a poorly synced video. His boots left wet prints on my hardwood floors, but when I glanced back to check the damage, the marks had vanished. A trick of the shadows, surely. The storm was making me jumpy. I'll just unpack these for you. He set the bags on the counter and began removing items. His fingers seemed longer than they had at the door, joints bending at odd angles as he reached into the bags. Each item emerged like a weapon in disguise. A box of animal crackers with circus animals on the front, the same faded colors I used to stare at while trying to find my voice. Once, that buttery vanilla smell had meant safety. Saturday afternoons with Mom, cookies and cartoons. Until he took that too, turned it into his ritual. A cookie for every secret kept. Now that sweet scent carried darker notes underneath, like flowers starting to rot. strawberry Nesquik powder in that familiar pink container that made my palms sweat even now. My favorite treat, until it became his tool. The artificial strawberry that had tasted like childhood happiness turned medicinal, mixing with the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. A package of bologna with the red ring around the edges. Oscar Mayer, the only brand he ever bought. The processed meat smell that once meant quick sandwiches and summer picnics now carried the taint of those midnight offerings, left by my bedside like sacrifices to a dark god. The room contracted around me, air growing thick and stale like it used to in my childhood bedroom. A metallic taste flooded my mouth, and I had to fight the urge to spit. Those items didn't belong here in my adult space, my safe place. They were artifacts from a past I'd carefully walled away, and seeing them lined up on my counter like exhibits in a twisted museum made my knees go weak. The smell of them together, that sickly sweet blend of vanilla cookies, artificial strawberry, and processed meat, was his signature. A scent that had slowly transformed from comfort to warning sign, like how animals can smell a storm coming. My throat went dry, closing up just like it used to. There must be some mistake. I didn't order any of this. My voice came out high and thin. A child's voice. I could feel myself shrinking, that old helplessness creeping in from the corners of my mind. The emergency granola bars I'd ordered were nowhere in sight. Instead, these ghostly pieces of my past stood accusingly on the granite countertop, their packaging somehow bright and faded all at once, like photographs that had been haunting a drawer for decades. James tilted his head, reminding me of a bird studying its prey. The movement went too far, neck craning at an impossible angle. In the fluorescent kitchen light, his shadow didn't match his posture. It remained upright, rigid. Didn't you, Jennifer? Isn't this what you used to eat at 2487 Maple Street, back in Ohio? My childhood address. The room tilted sideways, and I gripped the counter to stay upright. How do you know that? His smile didn't reach his eyes. In fact, I realized with growing horror, his eyes hadn't blinked once since he'd arrived. The skin around them seemed too tight now, stretched like plastic wrap over something angular beneath. The same way I know about Rusty, your golden retriever. The same way I know about the manuscript you've been afraid to finish. The one about what really happened that summer. The power chose that moment to go out, plunging us into darkness. Only my laptop screen still glowed from my desk in the next room, casting strange shadows across James's face. In the blue-white light, I could see what my mind had been trying to deny. His features weren't just shifting, they were rearranging themselves. His cheekbones rose and fell like waves under his skin. His jaw seemed to unhinge slightly with each word, revealing too many teeth, too perfectly aligned. The darkness between his teeth seemed to go on forever. The emergency lights I'd installed after moving to the mountains kicked in, bathing the kitchen in a dim red glow. James stood motionless, still smiling that empty smile, his hands resting on the counter where the grocery bags had been. The bags were gone now, but the childhood foods remained. Accusatory totems from a past I'd tried to bury. A blast of wind rattled the windows. How do you know about my manuscript? My voice came out steadier than I felt. I never told anyone about that story, not even my agent. James picked up the box of animal crackers, turning it in his hands. The circus animals on the front seemed to dance in the red light. Page 17. The therapist's office always smelled like animal crackers and broken promises. That's where you stopped writing, isn't it? My heart slammed against my ribs. Those words. My words. Words I'd deleted months ago in a panic at 3 in the morning. The smell hit me then. Artificial vanilla and stale butter, mixed with leather from the oversized armchair and the sharp antiseptic underneath it all. Every Wednesday at 4 p.m., that same combination of scents. The crinkle of cellophane as Dr. Morris opened a fresh pack of cookies, trying to make a frightened child feel safe. The way the circus animals would blur through my tears, lions and elephants dissolving into meaningless shapes as she asked the questions I couldn't answer. You're not a delivery driver. I began inching toward my office, toward my laptop. Though what protection I thought it might offer, I couldn't say. My mouth was dry, coated with phantom cookie dust that tasted like fear. I'm whatever you wrote me to be, Jennifer. He opened the animal crackers, and the sharp smell of artificial vanilla filled the air. But you never finished writing me, did you? You left me in limbo, left the story untold. His features shifted again, and for a moment, I saw someone else's face superimposed over his, a face I'd tried for 20 years to forget. This isn't real. I backed through my office doorway. You're not real. James crushed the box in his fist, circus animals scattering across the floor. Each cookie landed with a soft plink, like falling teeth. Tell that to the little girl who used to drink strawberry Nesquik in the hospital. Tell that to the child who hid under her bed every time she heard footsteps in the hall. Tell that to... The sickly sweet smell of artificial strawberry filled my nostrils, mixed with the metallic tang of hospital air. I could taste it on my tongue. That too thick pink milk they'd bring with my morning medication, trying to mask the bitter pills. The nurses thought they were being kind. They didn't know that he had always made me the same drink, his special treat, his little secret. That same cloying sweetness that made my stomach turn even now, 20 years later. I slammed the office, door, throwing the deadbolt. My laptop screen flickered, document still open to Chapter 7. Through the door, I heard James laugh, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. You can't hide from your own story, Jennifer. His voice came from directly outside the door. Not anymore. I pressed my back against the door, fingers trembling against the wood. The laptop's glow provided the only real light now. The emergency lights had died without my noticing. Another impossibility in a night full of them. You wrote me a key, Jennifer. Metal scraped against metal in the lock. Chapter 3, remember? The key that opened every door. You gave me that power. My eyes darted to the window, but at this elevation, with these drops? Suicide. The laptop's screen pulsed like a living thing, its glow seeming to breathe in time with my heartbeat. Ice crystals formed and melted in patterns that looked like veins, spreading from the edges toward the center. The keys beneath my fingers grew warm, then hot, as if the machine was running a fever. Each keystroke felt like pressing against skin, the keyboard becoming something organic, something alive. No! I lunged for the laptop, but the keys were already moving by themselves, rising and falling like chest breathing, typing faster than human fingers could move. The girl who wouldn't tell her story. The girl who thought she could hide. The girl who... I slammed the laptop shut. The edges sealed like flesh healing, then split apart again as it opened itself, screen blazing brighter than before. My fingers found the power button, held it down. Nothing happened. The machine had developed a will of its own, fueled by the story that needed to be told. You created me, Jennifer. Gave me shape. Gave me purpose. His footsteps circled the desk. But you never gave me an ending. Do you know what it's like, existing in that endless middle space? Living the same moments over and over, never reaching resolution? The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath in the laptop's light, could feel ice crystals forming on my eyelashes. The screen's glow had taken on a liquid quality, like light shining through seawater. Words floated up from its depths, fragments of memory rising like bubbles from the dark. Right. The word came from everywhere and nowhere. Write the truth. My chair slid forward on its own, bumping the backs of my knees until I fell into it. The laptop's screen showed a blank document now, cursor blinking expectantly. I can't. The keys frosted over beneath my fingertips. Please. Some stories are better left untold. James leaned down, his breath arctic against my ear. His features had fully transformed now. He wore the face from my nightmares, the face I'd tried to forget. But you don't really believe that, do you? That's why you created me. That's why I'm here. My hands moved to the keyboard, guided by an invisible force. Ice crackled across the screen, forming crystalline patterns around the edges of the document. The room had become a freezer, each breath painful in my lungs. That's right. James's voice had changed, becoming the voice I'd tried to forget. Tell them what happened that summer. Tell them why you sleep with the lights on. The words began to flow, not from my mind, but from somewhere deeper. A place I'd locked away behind 20 years of carefully constructed walls. The summer I turned 12. The hospital visits. The therapist with her animal crackers and gentle questions. The footsteps in the hallway. The shadow in the doorway. Keep writing. James's form flickered like a bad television signal, switching between the delivery driver and the other face. The real face. You're almost there. My fingers flew across the keys, every repressed memory pouring onto the page. The truth I'd hidden even from myself spilled out in black and white. I wrote about the locked doors that didn't stay locked, about the bologna sandwiches left by my bed when I was too scared to go downstairs, cut into perfect triangles, the bread always slightly stale, the meat warm from sitting out too long. The smell would wake me from fitful sleep, that processed meat and mayonnaise smell that meant he'd been in my room while I slept. About the day I finally told someone, and how no one believed me. How could they not smell it on him? That mix of Old Spice and bologna and animal crackers that haunted my dreams? The laptop's screen blazed brighter with each word until it burned like a miniature sun. James's presence behind me grew less solid, his voice becoming distant. The ending, he whispered. Write the ending. The storm outside had reached a crescendo, wind and snow and ice battering the cabin. Or maybe the storm was inside me, breaking free after all these years. I wrote the final words, the truth I'd never admitted, that the monster had been real. But so was my escape. I had survived. I had survived, and I had grown strong, and I was not afraid anymore. The screen flared blindingly bright. When my vision cleared, James was gone. The power hummed back to life, warm air flowing from the vents. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine white, untouched and new. My laptop showed a completed manuscript, not the novel I'd been struggling with, but a different story. My story. The one I'd been afraid to tell. The cursor blinked at the end of the final line, patient now, waiting. A knock at the door made me jump, but only for a moment. The old fear rose up and then dissipated like morning mist, replaced by something stronger. Through the window, I saw a delivery car and a young woman holding grocery bags. My actual grocery order. My reflection in the window showed me what I'd become. A woman who stood straight and tall, who met her own gaze without flinching. The dark circles under my eyes had faded, replaced by a clarity I hadn't known since childhood. Even the way I moved had changed as I walked to the door, each step purposeful and grounded, no longer trying to slip through the world unnoticed. As I opened the door, my phone buzzed with a notification from my publishing house. Received new manuscript, beginning review process. I took the grocery bags from the delivery woman, noticing how steady my hands were, how the old tremor had vanished completely. Bags held exactly what I'd ordered. Protein bars, fresh vegetables, ingredients for meals I would cook in a kitchen that was mine alone. Adult food, present food. No more traces of that twisted childhood menu. Back at my desk, I looked at my laptop one last time, at the story that had haunted me for 20 years. I could still smell traces of animal crackers and artificial strawberry in the air, but they were just smells now, stripped of their power. The memories would always be there, but they no longer had teeth. I opened a new document. The cursor blinked, an invitation rather than a taunt. I had more stories to tell, and not all of them were about darkness. Some were about survival. Some were about triumph. Some were still waiting to be discovered by these new, stronger hands. Because some stories don't let go until you set them free. But once you do, you find that you've also freed yourself.
That request came in at 2:47 a.m., when the fog had already swallowed most of downtown Millbrook. I'd been parked outside the 24-hour diner, nursing a coffee gone cold, debating whether to call it a night. The phone's screen flickered, Pickup at 342 Sycamore Lane, the old elementary school. My thumb hovered over decline. The place had been shut down 5 years ago after what happened. The investigation cleared me. Tragic accident, they said. But the bet started small after that. Just something to dull the memory of her mother's screams at the funeral. Then larger wagers, chasing that numbness. Now rent was due tomorrow, and I was still 200 short. The app chirped again, offering a surge bonus. Triple pay. Just like the triple or nothing bet that cost me my house last year. I cranked the heater and pulled away from the curb. The streets were empty, my headlights cutting yellow wedges through the mist. Past the closed shops, past the darkened houses, toward the edge of town where broken dreams went to die. The school materialized like a rotting tooth on the horizon. Chain link fence, rust-eaten. Patches of dead grass pushing through cracked asphalt. The playground equipment cast twisted shadows, and a lone swing creaked back and forth though there wasn't any wind. My hands trembled on the wheel. I hadn't been back here since that day. A flash of memory hit me. Pigtails bouncing past my office door, a cheerful, "Morning, Mr. Thorne," that I'd barely acknowledged, too focused on my phone. The last time I'd hear that voice, the purple ribbon in her hair had matched her backpack, I remembered. Such a small detail to haunt a man. I shifted my gaze to the art room windows, now dark and empty. Room 109, where they'd found the construction paper she'd been looking for, still clutched in her small hand. Since then, I'd traded my janitor's keys for a rideshare app and tried to drink away the memories. The parking lot light flickered, illuminating a small figure standing perfectly still beneath it. My GPS crackled with static, then went dark. The figure didn't move as I pulled closer, but I could see now it was a child. Couldn't be more than 10, wearing what looked like clothes from another era. A small collared dress, patent leather shoes, hair in perfect ringlets. My throat went dry. "Hey there," I called through the closed window. "You shouldn't be out here this late. Where are your parents?" The child's head turned toward me with an unnatural smoothness. A smile spread across their face, too wide, too many teeth. The rear door opened before I could reach the locks. The temperature in my car plummeted as the child slid into the back seat. I hadn't unlocked the doors. I hadn't even heard them open. The air grew thick with the scent of wet chalk and old copper pennies. My dashboard lights flickered and died, while the leather seats creaked like old playground swings. The metal frame of the car groaned as if under immense pressure. "Hello, Mr. Thorne." The voice wasn't a child's. It was deep, ancient, like stones grinding together in the earth. Static crackled through my radio speakers, forming whispered words I couldn't quite make out. "It's been a while since you worked here, hasn't it?" My fingers clutched the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I could only see darkness where the passenger sat. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm going to have to cancel this ride. 5 years, 2 months, and 14 days. A small hand reached forward, icy fingers brushing my shoulder. "Since you left your post as custodian. Since you forgot to lock the chemical storage closet." Bile rose in my throat. I jabbed the key in the ignition, but the engine only clicked weakly. In the mirror, shapes began to emerge behind my car. Small figures, dozens of them, their faces pressed against the windows. Each wore clothes from different decades, their skin pale as milk in the dim light. A boy in a Letterman jacket from the 50s, his neck bent at an impossible angle. A girl in bell-bottoms, her chest crushed from the accident with the cafeteria dumpster. 2 small brothers in matching overalls, soaked to the bone from the swimming pool incident of '82. They tapped on my windows with small fingers, leaving frost patterns like spider webs. Their whispers filled my car through the vents. "Your fault. Their fault. Our fault." The chorus grew louder with each passing second, 100 young voices sharing their stories of neglect, of corners cut, of adults who should have known better. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." The child in my back seat leaned forward. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of their face, familiar in a way that made my chest constrict. "But it is real, Mr. Thorne. As real as the day you decided checking your phone was more important than doing your rounds. as real as the little girl who found that unlocked door. My car's engine roared to life on its own. The GPS screen flickered back on, but instead of the map, children's drawings filled the display, crude crayon figures screaming in silence. The vents wheezed out air that smelled of musty textbooks and hand sanitizer gone sour. "Let's take a drive," my passenger said, down memory lane. The car lurched forward, though my foot wasn't on the gas. Metal shrieked against metal somewhere in the engine. Through the windshield, I watched in horror as the school seemed to grow, its dark windows lighting up one by one with a sickly yellow glow. Behind each pane of glass, small hands pressed against the dirty surface, waving. The sound of children laughing echoed through my speakers, distorted and wrong, like a cassette tape being played backward. The steering wheel spun beneath my hands as the car circled back to the parking lot. My muscles strained against the motion, but it was like fighting against solid steel. The headlights swept across the playground, illuminating more children, dozens now, maybe hundreds, their bodies flickering like old film reels. The air grew heavy with the metallic tang of old blood and the cloying sweetness of finger paint. "You remember her name, don't you?" The voice from the back seat had changed, becoming higher, sweeter, familiar. Katie Martinez. I was 7. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the memories flooded back. The call to the emergency room, the empty bottle of industrial cleaner, the tiny body on the stretcher. I didn't mean to." My voice cracked. "Look at me, Mr. Thorne." I forced myself to open my eyes, to look in the rearview mirror. Katie sat there, just as she had been that day. Pigtails, purple backpack, gap-toothed smile. Except now her skin was gray, her lips blue, and her eyes... God, her eyes were endless pools of accusation. "Do you remember what I was wearing?" Her voice trembled. "That morning?" The memory hit like a physical blow. Pink overalls, white shoes with rainbow laces. You just lost your front tooth the day before. "And what were you doing?" The temperature plunged lower. "When I walked past your office?" My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I was looking at my phone, betting scores, Raiders versus Chiefs. I'd put down $2,000 I didn't have. "Tell me what happened next." Her voice held centuries of pain. "You went to the supply closet, looking for construction paper for art class. The door should have been locked. The chemicals should have been secured. But My voice broke. I'd been too hungover to do my rounds, too focused on my bets. I heard you crying out, but by then... The car doors locked themselves. Outside, the spirits pressed closer, their hands leaving frost patterns on my windows. Each palm print was tiny, child-sized. The school building seemed to pulse with dark energy, its brick walls rippling like muscle. "Do you know what it felt like?" Katie's voice dropped to a whisper. "The burning, like fire in my throat, in my lungs. I called for help. I called for anyone, but you were too busy checking the score." Tears froze on my cheeks as the memories flooded back, the screams echoing down the hall, my sprint to the closet, her tiny body convulsing on the floor, the bottle of industrial cleaner rolling from her limp fingers. "We've been waiting for you to come back." Her voice echoed as if speaking from the bottom of a well. "All of us, the ones who died here before, the ones who stayed after. We've been so lonely, so angry." My breath came in ragged gasps. Ice crystals bloomed across the windshield in delicate, deadly patterns. The other children began to sing, a twisted version of Ring Around the Rosie that made my teeth ache and my soul shrivel. Through the frost-covered glass, I watched the school doors swing open. Dark figures spilled out, children from every era, their clothes and faces echoing decades of tragedy. A girl in a 1920s pinafore dragged a broken jump rope, the same one that had caught in the old elevator. Twin boys from the 60s, still wearing their lab safety goggles, chemical burns marking their faces. A small figure in a modern superhero backpack, who'd fallen from the roof just last year. Each one had died here. Each one had been failed by those meant to protect them. They formed a circle around my car, holding hands. Their song grew louder, that twisted version of Ring Around the Rosie that made my teeth ache and my soul shrivel. As they spun faster, their feet left the ground, bodies tilting, at impossible angles. Some flickered like bad television reception, showing glimpses of their final moments. Broken bones, burned skin, empty medicine bottles. "You can stay with us forever," Katie whispered. "Join our endless recess, or you can face what you did. Really face it." The engine revved. Through the windshield, I could see the heavy iron gates that marked the school's entrance. They were padlocked, chains wrapped tight. I had a choice to make. "I'm sorry," I choked out, each word like swallowing glass. "God, Katie, I'm so sorry. I was hungover that morning, checking messages from my bookie. I didn't just forget. I was irresponsible. I was selfish. You died because of me. A 7-year-old girl died because I cared more about a football game than doing my job." The singing stopped. In the mirror, Katie's face softened, became almost human again. "Say it. Say what you need to say." "I killed you." The words ripped from my throat like broken glass. "It was my fault. I've been running from it, drinking it away, but I killed you, and I can't take it back." The engine screamed. Katie's small hand touched my shoulder again, but this time it felt warm. "No, you can't, but you can live with it. Really live, and do better." I grabbed the wheel with both hands, pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The car shot forward toward the gates as the spirits wailed. Katie's voice rose above them. "Remember me." The impact should have crushed my car, should have killed me instantly. Instead, the gates shattered like sugar glass. I burst through into gray dawn, my tires squealing on wet pavement. When I finally pulled over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely shift into park. I looked in the back seat, empty, but on the leather upholstery lay a single purple hair ribbon. My phone buzzed. New ride requests were pouring in, all from 342 Sycamore Lane. I deleted the app. Some nights when I drive past the school, I see a small figure standing under the lights. And sometimes, no, I always stop to say hello. To remember, it's the least I can do.